My name is Maya Whitfield, and I was still wearing my scrubs when hospital security walked me through the ER lobby, like I was the one who had hurt somebody. 20 minutes earlier, I had been holding pressure on a gunshot wound. Now my badge was deactivated, my locker was being emptied into a cardboard box by a stranger from HR, and every nurse I had trained for the last 5 years was staring at me like I might be dangerous. Nobody had told them why. Nobody had told me why either, not really. Just 3 words on a termination form: policy violation immediate. I kept asking what policy. I kept asking who signed off on this. The security guard, a soft-spoken man named Desmond who had worked nights almost as long as I had, wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Maya," he kept saying. "I'm just doing what I'm told." What I didn't know yet was that somewhere in a locked cabinet 2 floors above me, a pharmacy log had my name on a withdrawal I never made. I didn't know that the man who fired me had a nephew wearing a white coat who needed me gone before I said one more word out loud. And I definitely didn't know that in exactly 90 seconds, the doors of that ER would fly open and the single most powerful person on this hospital's board would collapse onto the floor I had just been forced to walk across, and that she would look up through the chaos and recognize my face. She would refuse to let anyone else touch her. She would ask, in front of the administrator who had just destroyed my career, why the only nurse she trusted was being led out in handcuffed silence toward the exit. And that question would be the first crack in a lie that had been building for months. 3 weeks before that afternoon, I didn't know I was already being erased. I had worked the overnight shift in the emergency department at Ashford Memorial for 5 years, ever since I was 22 and desperate enough to take any job that would let me keep custody of my son, Eli, while his father decided fatherhood wasn't for him. Nursing school had nearly broken me. Night shift nearly finished the job. But I was good at it, the kind of good that doesn't come from confidence, but from paying close attention when everyone else is too tired to. That attention was the only reason I noticed what Dr. Preston Doyle was doing to Mr. Alvarez in Bay 6. Preston had joined the department 8 months earlier, right around the time his uncle, Grant Doyle, was promoted to hospital administrator. Nobody said the word nepotism out loud, not where it could be repeated, but everyone thought it. Preston moved through the ER like a man who had never once been told no. He was fast. He was confident. And twice now, I had caught small things, a decimal point off on a dosage order, a chart note that didn't match what I'd actually observed at the bedside. The night with Mr. Alvarez was different. Preston had ordered a dose of a blood thinner nearly triple what the patient's chart called for, given his kidney function. I caught it before it left the medication cart. I said something quiet, professional, exactly the way I'd been trained. "Dr. Doyle, can we double-check this against his creatinine levels?" He looked at the number. His jaw tightened. He said, "Good catch," and changed the order. But his eyes told me something different. His eyes told me he would remember this. I reported the near miss the way hospital policy required, through the internal safety system, not naming him with any accusation, just documenting the correction, the way I'd documented dozens of small saves over the years. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, Grant Doyle called me into his office for the first time in 5 years of employment. He was polite, almost gentle. He asked how I was handling my workload, whether the overnight hours were wearing on me, whether I'd ever considered a change of pace. I told him I loved my job. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and said that was good to hear. I didn't understand, yet, that I had just been marked. The following week, our pharmacy began a routine audit. Nothing unusual, they happened quarterly. Except this one flagged a controlled substance discrepancy tied to my employee ID. 2 vials of fentanyl checked out under my login during a shift I'd actually spent, according to my own memory, assisting a trauma case 3 rooms away. I told compliance that had to be a system error. I told them to check the badge swipe logs, which recorded exactly where I was and when, down to the minute, every time I moved between secured areas of the department. I told them I had never, in 5 years, had so much as a warning on my record. Nobody checked the logs. Not yet. Instead, 4 days later, in the middle of a Tuesday shift, with a patient's blood still on the cuffs of my scrub top, I was called to the nurse's station and told to surrender my badge. There's an active investigation into a controlled substance diversion, the HR representative said, reading from a card like she'd memorized it for exactly this moment. Per policy, you're being placed on immediate termination pending review. Immediate termination, not suspension, not administrative leave with pay while they sort it out. Termination, final, effective that hour. No appeal process explained to me before I was walked toward the door I'd walked through 1,000 times as an employee and was now walking through as a stranger. I thought about Eli. I thought about the mortgage on the small house I'd finally saved enough for. I thought, with a kind of cold clarity that surprised even me, that someone had built this, carefully, deliberately, and that the someone was standing 2 floors above me in a corner office with a view of the parking lot, watching a problem disappear. I didn't cry in that lobby. I promised myself I wouldn't give anyone that. And then the ambulance bay doors slammed open, and a woman's voice, high, panicked, belonging to someone I recognized instantly, screamed for help. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and everyone in that hospital knew it because the cardiac wing had her name carved into its cornerstone. She was 71 years old, one of the wealthiest women in the state, and she had personally funded the trauma center's newest wing after her husband died there 11 years earlier of a heart attack the old facility hadn't been equipped to treat fast enough. Every doctor in that building knew her face. Every administrator, including Grant Doyle, treated her visits like royal appearances. She was clutching her chest when her driver half-carried her through the doors, her lips already tinged with the pale blue-gray that meant every second mattered. I didn't think. I moved. 5 years of instinct doesn't switch off because someone took your badge. I was at her side before the triage nurse even reached the desk, calling out her symptoms, her rough blood pressure from the pulse under my fingers, the fact that her pupils were unequal, something that mattered, something a rush team might miss in the first chaotic seconds. A resident I didn't recognize started barking orders. I stepped back to let them work because I no longer had the legal right to touch her chart, to push medication, to do the job my hands still remembered perfectly. That was when Eleanor Vance grabbed my wrist. Her, she said, her voice thin but absolutely certain. I want her. The resident hesitated. Someone said my name wasn't authorized to be in the room. Eleanor's grip tightened. I know this woman, she said. She saved my grandson's life on the side of Route 9 4 months ago, in the rain, off the clock, with nothing but her own 2 hands, and I am not letting anyone else touch me until she is standing where I can see her. I hadn't known she'd ever learn my name. That night on Route 9 had been an accident I'd come across driving home from a shift. A car flipped in a ditch, a teenage boy trapped and bleeding, no ambulance for another 11 minutes. I did what I'd been trained to do. I never thought about who his grandmother was. I never thought about it mattering. It mattered now. Grant Doyle arrived at the edge of the bay at almost the same moment, drawn by the commotion, his face carefully arranged into the expression of a man in complete control of his hospital. When he saw me standing beside Eleanor Vance's gurney, that expression flickered. Just once, just barely, but I saw it because 5 years of watching faces for the truth people don't say out loud had trained me for exactly this. Mrs. Vance, he said smoothly, you're in excellent hands. Ms. Whitfield is no longer. I don't care what she is no longer, Eleanor said. I care what she is right now, which is the only person in this building I trust to be near me. Explain to me why she was being walked out of here like a criminal, Grant, and explain it quickly, because I am not having a heart attack in a hospital that just fired the one nurse I asked for by name. I watched something calculate behind Grant Doyle's eyes. He needed Eleanor Vance stable and comfortable, and more than anything, not asking questions in front of witnesses. He looked at me. Assist, he said quietly. Under Dr. Reyes's supervision. Nothing more. For the next 40 minutes, I worked a case I had no legal authorization to work, watched by a man who very badly wanted me gone, beside a patient who very badly wanted me to stay. I confirmed her medication allergies from memory, because I remembered her chart from that night on the road when her grandson had listed them to the paramedics. I caught, mid-crisis, that the resident was about to order a contrast dye for imaging that her chart, the one I remembered, not the one currently pulled up on the newly assigned physician's tablet, flagged as a severe allergy risk. The physician whose name was now attached to Eleanor Vance's case, the one Grant Doyle's office had assigned that very week under a new VIP patient protocol, was Dr. Preston Doyle. I said nothing about that out loud. Not yet. I filed it away. The same instinct that had caught the decimal point on Mr. Alvarez's order 3 weeks earlier, now cataloging something far larger, a pattern of a young doctor with a powerful last name being quietly steered toward the hospital's most valuable patients, and a nurse who noticed his mistakes being quietly steered out the door. When Eleanor was finally stable, moved up to cardiac care, resting with color back in her face, she held my hand and said, "You are not leaving this hospital without me understanding exactly what happened to you today." I told her the truth. All of it. The near miss with Mr. Alvarez. The strange meeting in Grant Doyle's office days later. The pharmacy audit that flagged medication I had never touched during a shift I could prove, with badge logs no one had bothered to check. I had spent somewhere else entirely. Eleanor Vance listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she asked a single question. "Where are those badge logs kept?" "Security server," I said. "But my access was cut this afternoon. I can't pull anything myself anymore." She looked at me with the calm, unbothered patience of a woman who had spent 40 years building companies and had learned exactly how institutions protect themselves when they're wrong. "Then we won't need your access," she said. "We'll need theirs." That night, before I even reached my car in the employee lot, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. It was the hospital's chief compliance officer, a woman named Renata Ibarra I had met exactly once, at a mandatory training session 2 years earlier. "Mrs. Vance has requested a full independent review of your termination," Renata said. "Effective immediately. I need you to come in tomorrow morning and tell me everything, in detail, on the record." I sat in my car in the dark for a long moment before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to start the engine. I had walked out of that hospital that afternoon believing I had lost everything. I drove home that night understanding, for the first time, that the woman who had once trusted me with her grandson's life on the side of a dark road was now the only person in that building with enough power to make someone finally check the truth. The review took 11 days, and I spent every one of them terrified it would find nothing, because I understood, better than almost anyone, how easily a hospital can bury an inconvenient question if it wants to badly enough. But Renata Ibarra turned out to be exactly what her title promised: relentless, procedural, and entirely uninterested in protecting anyone's last name. She pulled the badge swipe logs first, the ones that placed me down to the minute, assisting a trauma case 3 rooms away from the medication cabinet at the exact moment the flagged fentanyl withdrawal had occurred under my login credentials. That alone should have ended the investigation into me. It didn't end the investigation into what had actually happened, because someone had used my login. And there were only a handful of staff members with the administrative override required to access another employee's credentials without triggering a separate audit trail, a list that, when cross-referenced against shift schedules for that night, narrowed to exactly one name: Preston Doyle, who had covered a brief medication cart shortage that same evening while the assigned pharmacy tech was on break, and who, Renata discovered, digging further, had a documented pattern going back nearly a year of small, quietly corrected dosage errors that had never once been formally reported because every nurse who caught one had been either transferred, reassigned to a different floor, or, in my case, terminated within weeks of speaking up. I hadn't been the first. I had simply been the one who happened to have Eleanor Vance walk through the doors at the exact moment it mattered. Renata found 2 other nurses, one from cardiology and one who had left the hospital entirely 8 months earlier, both of whom had noticed similar near misses involving Preston Doyle, both of whom had reported them quietly, both of whom had left the department shortly after under circumstances that, examined together for the first time, no longer looked like coincidence. What emerged, slowly, over those 11 days, was not the story of one bad doctor. It was the story of an administrator protecting his nephew's reputation by systematically removing anyone who threatened to expose it, and using the hospital's own compliance systems, the very tools meant to protect patients, as the weapon to do it. Grant Doyle did not confess easily. When Renata and the hospital's outside legal counsel confronted him with the badge logs, the login timeline, and the pattern of quietly displaced nurses, he first insisted it was an unfortunate coincidence. Then, he insisted the diversion case had been handled entirely by pharmacy, not by him personally, and that he'd simply trusted their findings. It was only when Eleanor Vance, sitting in that meeting not as a patient, but as the hospital's largest single donor and a voting member of its board, asked one plain question that the room went quiet. "Grant," she said, "if this was truly pharmacy's independent finding, why did you personally call Maya Whitfield into your office and ask about her workload 4 days before that audit ever began?" There was no good answer to that question. There never had been. Grant Doyle resigned 8 days later, before the board could formally vote on his termination, in a statement that used the words mutual decision and new chapter, and never once used the word nephew. Preston Doyle's case was referred to the state medical board for review of both the credential misuse and the pattern of undisclosed dosage errors. His hospital privileges were suspended pending that investigation. I never took satisfaction in watching either of their careers unravel. I had spent 5 years believing good work should be its own quiet reward. What I felt, instead, standing in the hallway outside that final meeting, was something closer to relief, the specific, bone-deep relief of finally being believed. My reinstatement letter arrived the following week, along with full back pay and a formal written apology I hadn't expected and didn't need, but was grateful for anyway. They offered me my old position back. Then, 3 weeks after that, the new interim administrator, a soft-spoken internal hire named Dr. Okonkwo Reyes, who had spent her first meeting apologizing to nearly every nurse in the department, offered me something different, a newly created role overseeing patient safety reporting for the entire emergency department, with real authority to investigate the kind of near misses that had once got me fired for noticing. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Eleanor Vance came to see me once more, near the end of that month, not as a patient this time, but simply as herself, sitting in the small office I'd been given looking, for the first time since I'd met her, completely at ease. "You could have said nothing that night in the lobby," she told me. "You could have decided you were too tired, too hurt, too finished with this place to explain yourself to anyone. Most people would have." "I almost did," I admitted. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm glad I asked. I think about that afternoon often, the cardboard box, the deactivated badge, the long walk through a lobby I thought I'd never see again. I think about how close the truth came to being buried simply because the people protecting it had more power than the people who noticed it first. And I think about the strange, quiet mathematics of it all, that the only reason anyone finally listened was a chance encounter on a dark road months earlier, when I wasn't thinking about my career or my reputation at all, only about a frightened boy trapped in a car, and doing the one thing I knew how to do. Eli asked me, the night I got my old badge back, whether I was happy again. I told him I was something better than happy. I told him I was proven right and that those aren't always the same thing, but when you're lucky enough to get both at once, you hold on to it. I still work nights. I still notice the small things, the decimal point out of place, the dosage that doesn't quite match the chart, the quiet moment before someone speaks up. But now, when I notice, someone actually listens. And that, more than any apology, more than any back pay, more than watching the people who tried to erase me lose everything they'd built on top of that lie, that is the thing I carry with me every single shift, down every quiet hallway of the hospital that once tried to walk me out its doors for good.